So what's going on guys, Kids here, and welcome back to a brand new video. For today I will show you the new insane and improved Gley build in the first Descendant. So in this guide I will show you what weapons and modules you want to get. Then I will explain every single skill and show you the best reactor stats and external components. And then lastly we will take a closer look at the gameplay and weapon mods, so you would know the reason behind every single choice and what exactly will give us the best results and highest damage possible and much more. If this sounds interesting to you, then let's get right into it. So our new Gley build will focus on getting as much DPS as possible, while getting even more buffs by exchanging our HP for damage. This specific setup is high risk but very high reward, as you will be getting crits basically 100% of the time, and as long as you can dodge enemy attacks, you will be doing millions of damage in boss fights. Right now in the current meta, Gley is the second highest damage character behind Bunny, and if you can learn to use her unique skills and strength to your advantage, then we will be doing much more damage than any other Descendant in this game, especially in boss fights. So then with that said, now let's take a look at our build modules. And for the first one, we want to use the Predator Instinct, which does that when using a firearm. While frenzied, the firearm ADK gradually increases. Then Shock Punch, that modifies our charge sub-attack. We can use this to attack when performing a charge sub-attack. And on top of that, our module capacity increases. And that's why you will see this module in basically every single build. Then Increase Defenses, that increases our defenses by about 16%. Then Nimble Fingers, that reduces our skill cooldown by -6%. Then Battle of Stamina, that increases our max HP by 12% and skill duration by 8.8%. Then Time Distribution, that decreases our skill cooldowns by -4% and increases our max HP by 13%. Then Increased HP, that increases our max HP by 22%. Then Skill Extension, that increases our skill duration by 9%. Then Heat Antibody, that increases our fire resistance by 154. This personally is up to every player. Usually, depending on what type of enemy I will fight, I might change it to another type of resistance, or anything else I would need. So basically, this is a flex slot. And finally, the Iron Will, which does that when our shield is at 0%, it increases our defensives. And as our Gley doesn't have any shields whatsoever, so we have increased defensives 24/7. Overall, our main goal with the setup is to mainly use the Predator Instinct and Shock Punch, because they will increase our damage the most. And for the rest, we want to focus on decreasing our skill cooldown, or increasing their uptime, as our Gley skills will be giving us insane damage boosts, so the more we use them, the more damage we will be able to do. And finally, as we will sacrifice most of our HP for damage buffs, so then for the rest modules, we will focus on increasing our defensives, so we won't get one-shotted by the enemy bosses. I've tested a lot of different setups, and this one right now is the most optimized one. Then next up, let's take a look at the best weapons and mods that we should use. So for our weapon loadout, the first one is the Eternal Willpower. This is not an ultimate weapon, so we won't get any unique effects, but because of our mods, we will do crazy amount of damage. And you can get it by farming the Agnata Desert Zone, Mirage Town area, Commanding Ground Battlefield mission, or in the same location, so the Agnata Desert Zone, Mirage Town area, but the Red Sphere normal mission. The Eternal Willpower is a rare assault rifle that you can only get through random drops from these areas. And then when you get it, for mods, we wanna use the Action and Reaction, that increases our explosive ADK by 15% and recoil by 5%. Then Better Concentration, that increases our critical hit damage by 9%. Then Better Insight, for increased critical hit rate by 10%. Then Concentration Priority, that increases critical hit damage by 8% and reload time modifier by -8%. Then Fire Rate Concentration, that increases fire rate by 8% and critical hit damage by +3.5%. Then Rifling Reinforcement, for explosive ADK increase by 12%. Then Inside Focus, that increases our critical hit rate by 5% and critical hit damage by 3.5%. Then Chill Enhancement, that adds chill ATK equal to 8% of your weapon's ATK. And finally, the Aiming Compensation, that increases our accuracy by 8% and critical hit damage by +5%. With these mods, like for most weapons, we wanna focus on increasing our damage, and because of our insane buffs from the rest of our setup, so we will want to focus on as much crit and explosive damage as possible. Then for our second weapon, we want to use the Nazester's Devotion, which does that when you hit an enemy weak point, it will apply a unique ability called the Devotion Mark that reduces the enemy's defenses by 30% for 3 seconds. This weapon is so much OP that you can just one-shot trash enemies, or use this on boss weak spots. For you to get this weapon, you will have to get Mastery rank 1, and then you can craft it by talking to the Magister Anus in Albion. To craft this weapon, you will need 1 Nazester's Devotion Polymer Synctium, which you can get from the Vespers, Lost Supply Depots, and Mosi Coliseum missions. Then 1 Nazester's Devotion Synthetic Fiber, and you can again get it from the Vespers and Lost Supply Depots in the Sepulture dungeon. Then 1 Nazester's Devotion Nanotube, which you can get from the Vespers, in the Moonlight Lake, and in the Fluid Plain Battlefield mission. And finally the last piece, which is the Nazester's Devotion Blueprint, you can get from the Vespers, in the Timberfall, and in the Ancient Giant Tree mission. And then when you get the weapon, we wanna use mods like the Action and Reaction that increases our explosive ADK by 15% and recoil by 5%. Then Bullet Rain that increases our fire rate by 8% and ADK by 1%. Then Rifling Reinforcement that increases our explosive ADK by 12%. Then Weak Point Sight that increases our weak point damage by 10%, but accuracy by -5%. Then Better Concentration that increases our critical hit damage by +9%. Then Target Detection that increases our critical hit damage by 5% and weak point damage by 2%. Then Aiming Compensation for +8% accuracy and +5% critical hit damage. Then Weak Point Detection that increases weak point damage by 5% and ADK by 1%. Then Weak Point Expansion that on weak point hit, it will increase your weak point damage by 35%. And finally the Better Insight for +10% critical hit rate. As for most weapons, we use the mods to increase our weapon's damage. And because of our unique ability that gives us better weak point damage, so we try to focus with our mods to increase its damage even more for that one-shot capability. And finally, for our third weapon of choice, we have the Afterglow Sword Sniper Rifle. On hitting a weak point, this weapon will inflict the unique effect called the Death Propagation, which increases our critical hit rate and applies this effect to the next attack. We mainly want to use the sniper for long range fights, but usually my third weapon slots are flex slots. So again, as long as you use the first 2 weapons, the last choice is up to you. But I really like the sniper, as you can use it for multiple descendants at the same time. And then the way you get it is by collecting all items, reaching Mastery 15, and researching it for 100,000 by talking to the Aeneas at Albion. You can get the Afterglow Sword Blueprint, Nanotube Blueprint, and Polymer Synctium Blueprint by farming the Intercept Battle on hard mode. And then for the last Afterglow Sword Synthetic Fiber Blueprint, you can get it from the Vesper on hard mode, or from the Kingston on the hard mode as well. And then when you have it, we wanna use mods like the Weak Point Sight that increases our weak point damage by 10%, but decreases accuracy by -5%. Then Better Insight, which increases firearm critical hit rate by 10%. Then Fatal Critical, that increases our critical hit damage by 5% and critical hit rate by 1%. Then Shankton First Shot, that after you reload, your first shot gets 100% ADK increase. Then Action and Reaction, that increases our explosive ADK by 15% and recoil by 5%. Then Better Concentration, or increased firearm critical hit damage by 9%. And finally the Focus on Fire, that increases our fire skill power by 19% and decreases skill cooldown by 6%. As any sniper weapon, we want to increase our crits and overall damage, so with our mod setup we have made it that you can basically crit the enemies 100% of the time. Then next up, let's go over to the base reactor and external components. So your reactor is very important item that determines your skill damage and can also include extra modifiers that buff certain aspects of your build. The better your reactor is, the more damage your skills will deal to enemies. I recommend prioritizing using reactor with the highest skill power and a sub-attack power. Specifically, my best job that I got is this Frozen Singularity reactor, but I'm still farming to get better optimization condition that would be more capable with one of my 3 weapons. And then as for your external components, they're even more of an RNG, at least until you've played the game for long enough to find basically every single possible combination with a good stat roll. For our build specifically, I recommend to get the defensive support auxiliary power, that increases our defenses, then the HP support sensor, that increases our HP, then defense support memory, that increases our defenses, and finally the supernova processor, that increases our defensives. Again, I've tried multiple setups, but as we're constantly on low HP, so having as much defensives as possible is the way to go. And finally, let's quickly take a look at our skills and when we should use them. The first passive skill is called the Thirst, that makes that we can't have shields or mana, but instead when we kill enemies, they drop a life sphere that restores our HP and adds a stack to the power of life. Then our first active skill is the Frenzied, that increases our firearm 80k and penetration but reduces HP recovery. This is our best ability, because this is what makes Gley such a dominant damage dealer. While it's active, it gives a boost in 80k and penetration at the cost of reducing healing, so we want to use the skill 24/7. Then the second one is Life Siphon, that damages enemies in a range while recovering your HP. This will give you different effects depending on our frenzy state. This skill is the best way to recover our HP. The lower our HP is, the better for the build, so it will incentivize you to risk it and drop low purposely. Then activate the Life Siphon for an HP and damage boost. Then for one of the last ones we have the Increased Sensory, that applies a different effect depending on our frenzy state. This is another skill that increases our damage at the expense of movement speed. You won't consume bullets, while Maximized Lethality is active, so this is a perfect skill for a boss meltdown, where you don't need to move but just deal insane amount of damage. And finally we have the Massacre, that switches our equipped weapon to a Massacre. Enemies hit by this take heavy damage and are inflicted with additional effects. Your Massacre weapons will stun enemies in a non-frenzied state, or deal additional damage during the frenzied state. Therefore you want to activate the Frenzy and swap to the Massacre when your health is high and damage is needed. Additionally, you can use this as a defensive tool when under pressure and needing stuns to avoid incoming damage. And that's about it. So with that said, I really do appreciate everyone for watching guys, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or suggestions, then feel free to leave your comments in the comment section down below. And while you're doing that, please click like, subscribe and enable that notification bell, so this way you could support the channel and not miss any more amazing content. With that said, you have an amazing day and I will see you in the next one, so take it easy, peace.